right, good evening, everyone, and thank you all for being here. I want to give you a nice, warm welcome to the CTAC virtual meeting on June 30th, 2020. I appreciate your being here, and I sincerely hope, trust, and pray that you and all of your loved ones are all weathering and navigating your way through our nation's multiple crises, and you're all doing so very safely, healthy, and successfully.
Is this all the people that are in now? Wow, I'm on before everybody else.
Please mute your phone, Mr. Swerdlin. You're mic'd. Thank you. So the meeting is now gavelled in, and want to introduce Mr. Ivan Menes, who will manage and control the IT aspects of this virtual meeting, along with our coordinator, Mr. Chance. So Ivan, could you please display the rules of engagement for this meeting for everyone's reading, understanding, and for maintaining order during this meeting? Thank you. I guess I should highlight the public participants section because particularly we've got some people calling in, and those people who are calling in on their telephone will not have the opportunity to raise hands. And those of us that are on camera and on the computer will have the ability to raise their hands if they want to be recognized and to contribute to the meeting. So for those of you who are out there who are calling in, you would only have an opportunity to be vocal and to participate when Ivan unmutes. Ivan, could you unmute the disruption, mute the disruption, please? Thank you. So Ivan will unmute your microphone during the public comments sessions, and that's when you will have an opportunity to speak. Committee members will have an opportunity to raise their hands now that we're on Zoom. So that's how you will be recognized, and then you can unmute your microphone and say your piece as appropriate. So with that said, Ivan, thank you so very much, and I will now ask our coordinator, Mr. Chance, to please confirm quorum.
Thank you, Chair. At this point in time, as we begin the meeting and before we do a roll call, I'd just like to welcome everybody to the meeting, the CTAC meeting. And as I call your name, please unmute yourself and say present. Alexander Adams, my child, Alan Fishman,
here.
Susan Gouache, Benjamin Hendrick, Jasmine Johnson,
Present.
Marlon Kelly Sr.,
Yes, present.
Convicted of first-degree murder.
Antonio Reyes, Susan Shine,
Here.
Lee Swardlin,
Here.
Naomi Wright, Naomi, okay.
Present.
Vice Chairman Daniel Iglesias,
I'm here.
Chair Dr. Claudius Carnegie.
Here. Thank you.
Chair, we have a quorum.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Coordinator. I'd like to now move to the next item, and that is the approval of the agenda. So I'd like to entertain a motion and a seconder for the approval of the agenda. And in this case, any opposition to the approval, just say nay, and we will accept that. So Do I have a motion and a seconder?
Move to approve.
That's Naomi Wright, thank you. Seconder?
Second. That's
And who
Lee.
was?
Lee.
Oh, Lee. Thank you, Lee. So we have Naomi Wright and Lee Swerden for the record. And any opposition to the approval of the agenda, please say nay. Hearing none. Oops, did I hear something?
No opposition. I just wanted to say, I just logged in, so I am here. Mari Child, thank you.
All right. So no opposition for the record, Mr. Coordinator. So I'll move on to the next item, which is the approval of the minutes. And again, I'd like to entertain a motion and a seconder for the approval of the minutes. And these minutes are from June 3rd, 2020. Any opposition, please say nay. So a mover and a seconder.
So moved.
I'll move. This is Jasmine.
Jasmine moves. And who's the seconder?
I'll second.
Thank you, Naomi. So Jasmine and Naomi for the record. Any opposition, please say nay. Hearing none, the minutes are unanimous. The approval of the minutes are unanimous for the record. Okay, moving on to the next item, Mr. Coordinator, any membership update?
At this time, Chair, there are no membership updates.
All right, thanks, sir. Moving on, public comments. Are there any public comments? Ivan, please open up the microphone for participants.
Microphones are open for all attendees.
Thank you, sir. And any public comments? Going once? Going twice? 3 times? So we're going to close the first public comments, and thank you all for that. And then we're going to get into our action items. And the first item, item number 7, Urban Mobility Strategist Study.
Through the chair, just correction, no action items. These are just information items.
All right, thank you for that clarification, Mr. Coordinator. So, Mr. Fishman, we're going to give you a break tonight. How about that? So,
And just for the record, Susan Gouache is present as well.
all right, Susan Gouache is here. Good, thank you. So, item 7 on the agenda, Urban Mobility Strategy Study. The presenter is Lisa Colmenares, Miami-Dade TPO Program Development Manager. Lisa, you're recognized. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the CTAC. My name is Lisa Colmenares from the Miami-Dade TPO. I'm the Program Development Manager. And just also for your information, I also have here today with me Mr. Thomas Rodriguez from WSP. They are the consultant firm that assisted us in preparing this study. Next slide. So the urban mobility strategies was a directive from the Urban Mobility Task Force, which is a group of the Miami-Dade TPO, which was created by our TPO Governing Board Chairman. And the chair of the Urban Mobility Task Force is Board Member Higgins. And we also have other members like Vice Chair Bobo. We also have Board Member Heyman, Board Member Hantman, Vice Mayor Lago. We also have Mayor J.C. Bermudez. And they all work collectively to ensure that we provide strategies that arise and community issues during the development of transportation projects. So the directives to us, the TPO, for this study were very clear. They wanted us to improve the project development process and look at ways that we can do that. And one of the things that they wanted us to address was looking at interagency coordination and communication, also looking at interagency data sharing, One of the other things that was critical that we wanted to address with the study was minimizing impacts during roadway construction and improving project implementation, which is very linked to minimizing these impacts. And of course, seeing how the public was being engaged, so increased public engagement strategies. And another directive of the Urban Mobility Task Force was to identify industry best practices and how throughout the literature review and the best practices, we looked at how the project scoping was a way to streamline this and how stakeholder coordination and communication was being conducted at the national level and throughout other agencies. Next slide, please. So tonight for you, what we're going to present is a brief summary for your information of the work that we have provided. This was an expedited 9-month study to make sure that we could address these issues in a very rapid fashion. So we looked at the project development process. We also want to address, which was very critical, our study advisory group meeting and some stakeholder interviews that provided us information to move forward. And then we're going to provide you a summary of our recommended strategies and an action plan that we have crafted to move forward with these strategies. Next slide. So as you may be familiar, and I'm sure most of you are, there are many guidelines and manuals available at the national, state, and local level to look at project development processes. We have different policies like the Green Book for geometric design of highway streets. We have active design guidelines. FDOT has a context classification manual, and now they have also adapted their Florida Design Manual to incorporate these context classifications. We have complete streets design guidelines by the county, and we have an array of different manuals and guidelines that are what our state, local agencies and the county use to implement project development throughout the project development process, throughout the planning, design, and also through the construction process. They have to consider these different guidelines for implementation of projects. Next slide, please. So one of the things that the Urban Mobility Task Force wanted us to do was look at a study advisory group committee that was very different than what we normally do. We normally get technical folks on board talking to us. They wanted us to look at citizen representatives and look at things from a different perspective and get a fresh set of eyes to look at what was going on in the project development process. So of course we got representatives from all of our TPO citizen advisory committees, and we definitely want to thank Mr. Antonio Reyes and his alternate Jasmine. They were both very engaging and they both had wonderful ideas and input throughout the entire process. And of course, we want to definitely thank our BPAC representative, FTAC representative, and TARC. All of these members were key into the input of our 3 different study advisory group meetings that we had throughout the development of the project. We also had some citizen appointees directly from the Urban Mobility Task Force. So they were citizens that are very familiar with the project development process, and they're all experts in their own way throughout planning or urban mobility or complete streets, or they have different levels of expertise that were very, very interested in public involvement. So we had a very good representation and a very good input throughout our project development process when we were looking at this urban study. We also did stakeholder interviews one-on-one with representatives from state, county, and also the private sector and engineers. And these were done anonymously, so everybody could have a candid discussion with us and let us know how they saw the project development process, how they saw we could approach it and improve it from their expertise and experience. And we got a very good feedback it's very interesting to note that the feedback that we received from the study advisory group members and the stakeholders, and what we found in the literature review and in the best practices, they were all on the same page. Everybody is looking to improve the process and look at things to be better for the community in general. Next slide, please. So what we did is, this is a little matrix that summarizes. On the top for you, you have the three directives, the three main directives from the Urban Mobility Task Force. And on the left side, you have the 5 main recommendations that stem out of the 9 months of work that we did with our study advisory group members and our experts, and also through the extensive review that we did from the literature and the best practices. So our study, we wanted to see how each of the recommendations addressed each of the Urban Mobility Task Force directives. So the first thing that came about was in our best practices, and also in how to improve our project development process, was to create a county project scoping committee to streamline the project development process. And of course, we're going to show you specific action items to address this specific recommendation. But basically, the county is already working on something like this, and this will create a lot of time savings when we don't have any surprises when we get to a 90% design, that in the beginning, all of the different county agencies and even municipalities that are involved in a study area or in a project corridor can provide input on what's going on, what are the issues, what have we heard from the community, so that way we can properly scope out all of the issues and include them in the scope from the beginning at the get-go of the projects. The second recommendation that came about was to coordinate construction schedules to minimize impacts to the community. So this we heard loud and clear. There were some concerns that there may be a construction project going on, and maybe a month or two later, then there's impacts again on the same roadway facility. So I'm going to give a local example just in the neighborhood that I live in. So if we are, for example, in Aventura, and we have a project on Biscayne Boulevard, we want to make sure we properly coordinate with the city and with FDOT so that we don't have impacts for the public that's traveling along Ice Dairy Road or 199th Street, so that everybody knows the projects that are going on, if there's any utility conflicts and things like that. So all of the construction schedules be coordinated, and we're going to explain to you the action items that we have to address that. The other thing that was key, and this was one of the ones that most of our engineers and members that deal with the public, and I know Mr. Reyes was very emphatic about this, was to implement the utility conflict resolution process. It seems that a lot of the utility agencies, it's pretty hard to get the utility agencies on board early on in the process. So one of the things that we want to do is engage them early on, especially with the county. FDOT is already working on something like this. So we were able to get the state to provide that valuable input to then bring it on to other agencies. The other thing would be to create a county facilities improvement website, to have a one-stop shop where everybody could find all of the manuals and everybody could find what would be going on throughout the process. And then obviously, last but not least, is increase community engagement opportunities so that the public has more information and more data available. And this one addressed every one of the directives of the Urban Mobility Task Force. So now I'm going to go over each one of these recommendations in an action plan on the next slide. So the first thing would be to create a county project scoping committee, as I mentioned, that works for DTPW. So the county is already developing something like this, as I mentioned, a process similar to state models that we saw. So this is already something that works. It's a best practice. And the scoping committee will be implemented first on some pilots just to test how it's going. And we want to initiate these pilot scoping committee ASAP. So that way we can initiate and get this best practice rolling. Assess its effectiveness and make changes as necessary, and expand the process to then incorporate different projects in the pipeline. It's very important to get the support from the county departments and coordinate with external agencies, including the municipalities. Next slide, please. The next recommendation is the coordination of construction schedules. This was key, and it seems that this was one of the ones that created more delays and more impacts to the community that we have all been familiar and recognized in Miami-Dade County. So definitely we want to develop a construction coordination tool in the county and work with our IT department to support the development of this tool to coordinate construction schedules and provide this information to the public. Obviously, designating scheduling coordinators within all the participating agencies at the state, county, and municipal levels is important. And that way we can have memorandums of understanding between all of the agencies that have overlapping projects. This, we think, would take a time frame of between 12 to 18 months, and we would have DTPW, our county agency, in the lead in collaboration with the municipalities and the utility agencies as well, and the private sector. Next slide. Our next recommendation is a utility conflict resolution process to engage utility owners to provide utility location and provide comments as early as possible. We're thinking a best practice that we saw was between 30 and 60% design, no later than that. We don't want to get into a situation where we're 90% design and we're already too late. And that way we can have contractual structures to have some incentives with the contractors and prepare construction utility work schedules to minimize these project delays. And obviously we would need to look for funding for incentives, which have been already done in other locations around the nation and even in the state. Our next slide talks about looking at a one-stop shop or a county facilities improvement website to look at all of the guidelines and manuals and organizing all of these improvement standards and requirements. Definitely, we want to make sure that we are knowledgeable that the county is looking at efforts to update standards for complete streets. We support that in our study, and we want to continually update and revise information to respond to the evolving needs of the county. We also saw that this county facilities improvement website, as we saw in other locations, New York, Seattle, nationwide, they have all of the project development process and manuals and how to approach a project for the general public, or if you're a developer or if you're an agency, from planning all the way to design, construction, even programming of projects. So this is very valuable information that will help. We identified that the county RER already, the planning folks already have something similar to this that we would like to expand upon. They already have their manuals included in there. They already have their process included in there. It seems very seamless for them to work with outside partners and with the public as well. On the next slide, we identify increasing community engagement, and it's very important. We would like to have this construction coordination tool and have a public page that the public could very easily communicate information to them, and they could see where the project is located. They have everything in kind of like in a map that's easy to maneuver, and they could press on a link and see where the map, in a map format, where the projects are located. They could get information on those projects, where point of contact, who's the owner of the project. They could contact them. They could put a comment in that website. It can provide GIS data or any traffic data or any data that is readily available, We have some of that information on different locations, but we would like to centralize some of that existing information so it's a one-stop location and provide some opportunities for public input throughout the project development process, all the way from planning through construction. We want to make sure that the public information officers already are meeting quarterly from the FDOT and the county. We would like to expand this to also municipalities. It's already existing, so expanding it is a recommendation from this study. So the resources would be the development for the construction coordination tool, and a time frame would be 18 months, but it's depending on the implementation of the construction coordination tool that we had mentioned in a previous recommendation. So with that, I would like to end the presentation portion and thank you all for your time. And I would also like to open it up for any questions. And Thomas and I are available to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for such a great presentation. And yes, we are going to open up the floor for Q&A. I see a show of hands from Susan Shine.
Well, right before you do that, Chair, I just want to acknowledge, that Susan Gouache is present, and Benjamin Hendrick is present. Antonio, I'm not sure, is anybody else here? Antonio Reyes is still absent, and Alexander Adams is still absent. If I'm correct, if I'm incorrect, please let me know. So far, that's your attendance, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you for that update. And we're in Q&A, and I'm recognizing Susan Shine.
Hi, that was a really great presentation. The graphics were great. You could see I was up at the screen reading everything. It's wonderful. I really appreciate that. I only have two questions, which probably, I want to know, so, you know, I live on Miami Beach and we constantly have FDOT up against the beach and they don't let us know when they're doing something. You know, you were talking about the coordination. What, how do you plan to get them to cooperate, say? What methodology is available?
Sure, and that's one of the things that we were talking about in having that construction coordination tool, where we would have all of the projects that are coming online, and having all of the municipal projects, the county projects, and the DOT projects all coordinated, and also providing you as the citizen an opportunity to see whose project it is. We also find a little bit of confusion from the public sometimes, that they don't know exactly who's the owner of the project. They may think it's a DOT project, maybe it's a county project, so that way they could specifically contact the public information officer that can answer their questions.
I guess what I'm saying is, how do you plan to get buy-in from FDOT? I mean, you may be able to list their projects, but normally when I've heard that they don't inform, how are you going to get FDOT buy-in? That's one, and then I want to ask something about the utilities, and then I'm done.
Sure, and we did have interviews one-on-one with a management level staff at DOT, and they would like to definitely collaborate with these efforts, and they would definitely like to make sure that the word is getting across the best way as possible to the citizens. They have their public information officers for each project, but of course, if we could centralize the information, that's what we would like to achieve. Of course, we would have to start somewhere, so we would like to start with the county and expand it to then include the state and the municipal projects. So definitely the county would be the pilot, if you may, and then expand it to the other agencies.
Thank you, I appreciate that. The other question is about the utilities and, you know, getting their buy-in earlier on board. But, and then you mentioned that this happens nationwide. I had no idea. I thought it was a local we had talked about this in several meetings back, but I want to know if we have any jurisdiction over them. Why can't we, quote unquote, force them? I guess that's what is the basic issue? And how do you plan to get them to give us buy-in? Because you're asking them to pay up.
Sure, and I'm going to start the question, and then I'm going to turn it over to Thomas so he can explain a little bit more what we found in the nationwide literature and best practices. But what our recommendation was to definitely work with them early on, and then create an incentive-based program, which is what we're seeing in the best practices. Thomas, would you like to expand on the response for this question?
Yeah, certainly. Hopefully you guys can hear me all right on your end.
Thank you.
Great. Okay. Yeah, good evening, good afternoon. Thomas Rodriguez from WSP here. I'm happy to be with you all tonight. So just briefly to answer part of your question, which is oftentimes local ordinances and regulations have been preempted at the state level. That's something that's been experienced a lot with utilities. A good example would be pavement markings that you oftentimes see in the downtown area and throughout the county. I know the city of Miami at one time did try to pass a law, regulating that to be a bit more water-soluble ink, so those would wash off. The utilities turned around, went to the state, and got a law passed that kind of just overrode the local resolution on that front. So it is certainly a challenge that is why the recommendation that we've actually put forth isn't so much about penalizing, because our hands are very much tied at the state level on that regard. And while certainly state legislation is welcome and appreciated, it's not necessarily the scope and within the realm of what we have influence over conducting a study here at the TPO level here locally. So with that said, as Lisa mentioned, we're focusing more on incentives, kind of providing more of a carrot approach to really incentivize utilities to collaborate and cooperate. So what that means is there might be an opportunity to provide cash. Divulge what your conflicts or potential conflicts are early on in the design stage, and then subsequently also relocate your utilities on a timely basis as set forth within the construction schedule. Then there's potentially a financial reward for the utilities to actually that's pretty much in a nutshell. There's certain different sorts of techniques. There's ones where it's like, no excuses. They have to get utilities relocated by a certain day, irrespective of whatever eventualities may come up. There's somewhere, perhaps the contractor could help defray the cost of those relocations as well. So there's several different techniques that we uncovered during the literature review. Those are just a couple to name as an example.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Susan. Are there any other questions? I don't see any more hands.
Through the chair, it's Lee. Can I ask a question?
Yes. I didn't see your hand, but go ahead.
Well, I don't know how to do that part. Anyway, so there were several points in which you included in this plan public input. And in the beginning and in the planning stages, I get it, but it went down into when construction was actually going on. And I'm wondering how that's going to work. I mean, if the design is set, the plan is set, the contract's done, the contractor's out there working, how is public input going to be implemented or taken into account that far down the road in a project?
Sure, and it's more about communicating the information to the public as well. But I know that Board Member Higgins was looking at also how to increase the input throughout the project development process. So
the development process, but the actual, once the project,
starting in the planning phase. So throughout planning, design, construction, throughout all of the phases, because if I may, one of the things that we found was that during the planning, we have a lot of public involvement and a lot of input. And in construction, you have the information to the public, but in design, it gets a little bit lost. So we want to make sure that the public is engaged throughout the entire process of the project. And Thomas, if you would like to expand on that question.
Before you move on, that's the part I agree with you on. It's once the construction starts, I'm not understanding how public input could be taken, be incorporated.
Yeah, so it would be more on informing the details of the project, and if there's any issues with the project, that they know who to contact, so they can get a response on their issues.
Yes, if I may for a second, I guess the nature of the input shifts at that juncture, of course, right? The project is kind of set in stone. You have design plans, and it's kind of implementing those on the ground. That the input at that point, as Lisa noted, is kind of more informing the public about this is what stage the project is in. If there's any sort of delays or issues that have arisen that may have an impact on the community, that those are clearly expressed to the public. That aspect is, from our conversations we found has sometimes been lacking. And then the other component is, that's a two-way street. So if the public is in fact having issues with the construction, there's construction going on outside of permitted hours, or something is taking longer than it was supposed to, and again there's impacts, that is then also getting back to the project managers so that things can be remediated to make sure that that doesn't continue to be a persistent issue. So it's not so much that you're modifying the project during the construction, because that's not really exactly feasible. It's more about just making sure that that two-way communication remains in effect during the construction stages.
Great, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Lee. Thank you, Suzanne. So I do not see any other raised hands. So I guess that concludes the Q&A session for this particular item.
And through the chair, just want to acknowledge that you do have two people that are on the committee. Once again, you do have Antonio Reyes and you do have Jasmine Johnson, who are participating on this committee to represent CTAC. So,
yeah, thank you for that clarification, Mr. Coordinator. So with that, let's move on to the next item, item 8. And that would be Miami-Dade Transit 10 ahead 2021 to 2030. And the presenter is Francesca Taylor, AICP Miami-Dade Department of Transportation and Public Works, who is a senior planner there. So Francesca, you have the floor. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for allowing us to come and present to you today. We try to make it an annual tradition, to say the least, to come to the CTAC and present the Transit Development Plan, which you also know as the TDP, which we've branded as MDT 10 Ahead. So just to give a little bit of background on why this plan is important and why we come to you for your input, the TDP is a plan that we produce annually. It's state mandated, so mandated by the state in order for Miami-Dade Transit to be eligible for state block grant funds, which for us total about $20 million annually. So it's a very important plan for us to be able to continue our operations. The plan looks at a 10-year horizon. So it shows all of the projects and innovative ideas that we like to implement over the next 10-year horizon. Every year we update the plan, but every 5 years we have a major update of the plan. So last year, you may remember, we came to your committee with the major update. This year we're showing you the annual progress report. And for the next 3 years, we'll be reflecting that annual progress report. One other thing I want to mention about the importance of this plan is that it reflects other plans that are in the stratosphere. So it is consistent with the Miami-Dade County budget. So it reflects the transit plans that are there. It reflects the transportation improvement program that the TPO puts together, and as well as FDOT's work program and the long range transportation plan. Those plans are kind of segmented in our implementation plan. And we'll talk about that more as we discuss the chapters. So with that, I'm going to toss it over to our consultant team. We have WSP that works with us to produce this plan. And today we have Zach Parnas and Thomas Rodriguez. And I believe Zach is going to talk us through the chapters.
Thanks, Francesca. Yeah, let's make our way through the document. Now, if you are familiar with this from previous years, you will recognize a lot of this chapter layout. Essentially, we start with just an introduction to the document and an overview of transit in Miami-Dade County. Then we get into a little more depth about the civic engagement efforts that we went into this year. And then we move into really the meat of the document, which is the performance assessment. And this is where we look at the goals and objectives that were established in the major update. And we check in on whether or not we have met our targets and sort of where we're tracking in that process. We also will highlight a lot of important projects that DTPW has completed over the past year and how they apply to those goals and objectives. Now, the next big section is the implementation plan, and this is broken up into 3 different chapters. We have our implementation plan for the upcoming year. We have our 10-year implementation plan, which is broken apart into operations, capital projects, state of good repair, and then we also have 2030 and beyond. And this is really where we look at a lot of the visioning that DTPW does, and we see a lot of LRTP projects in there as well. We conclude with the financial plan, which is really a rundown of the hard numbers. So on the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about civic engagement. Now, this year's TDP, obviously, we had to adjust our civic engagement, but luckily we have a robust civic engagement plan that includes a lot of other forms of outreach, such as this meeting. So we're coming to you guys as representatives of the people to help us make sure that we do our job of engaging with the public as best we can. Now, in addition to that, we've increased our collaboration with other partner agencies. We're going to be presenting to SFRTA's PTAC as well. And there are other more citizen-centered groups such as the Miami Riders Alliance and the Transit Alliance. And this all helps us with our outreach because we're depending on these agencies to help reach their constituents. Now, we've also engaged in a lot of digital outreach. Normally for the TDP, we have a transit survey where we go out to the actual transit stations all across the county, and we've got multiple people there distributing surveys. This year, instead, we've shifted towards Facebook, Google, digital banner advertising. We've got ads placed with the New Times as well. We're really doing our best to reach out to as many people in the county as we possibly can. Physical surveys are still, of course, available. We've got them printed and ready to go so that anyone who's uncomfortable with the digital format can reach out and we can mail those surveys to them. Now, that survey online, we're reaching out through social media with the hashtag MDT10Ahead, through Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and a lot of these ads that you see on the right side send us to the online survey as well. Next slide, please. Now, we broke down the actual goals and objectives from the major update to these 10 primary goals, each of which has a number of different objectives. These fit into a number of different categories. Some of the simpler ones, such as convenience and customer service, really fit into just the rider experience. And then we've also got some more economic ones, looking at things like transit-oriented development, funding sources, things like that. And then we've got ones that are focused on things like equity and environment that really ensure that we're operating in a healthy, positive way for our community. Next slide, please. Now, moving into the implementation plan, for 2020, there are a number of large projects that we're working on. In addition to the bus purchases and the ongoing Metro Rail vehicle replacement, there's also refurbishment of Metro Rail stations and some improvements, some IRP projects, as well as the wayside overhaul for the Metro Mover. Now, the capital budget looks at a number of these different projects, including number of smart plan projects, which we'll go into more depth on the next slide. Now, for the smart plan, there's a lot of phase 1 planning still ongoing, and there are a few projects that have received LPAs that are now starting to move towards implementation. There are a number of different stations, including Panther Station and Tamiami Station, that are getting ready to go in fiscal year 20. And as we all know, the South Corridor has really picked up steam with its LPA, and will be moving forward with the South Dade Transitway as a major project. The BERT network is also picking up steam. Beach Express South has nearly $10 million budgeted for it, and a number of park and rides are being developed along the South Dade Transitway to support that corridor. Now, on the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about the 10-year implementation plan. Here's where we start moving into the operations tables. Now, these tables are still evolving, but these are some of the highlights from those tables. So funded projects include the 836 Express Bus and Kendall BRT, as well as the 27th Avenue Express, while we've got some other unfunded BERT projects that are still determining how that funding will come out so that they can enter operations in the near future. Next slide. Now, moving into the capital projects, you can see on the right here, they are distributed all throughout the county. A lot of these projects are major sort of tentpole projects that I think most people in this meeting will be familiar with. Things like major stations, the Panther Station, the underlined phase 1, as we all know, has begun construction in Brickell and will be moving on down along the Metro Rail path as time progresses. Next slide, please. For partially funded projects, this map may look fairly familiar, and that is because a large number of these projects are from the SMART plan. So you can see here things like the Northeast Corridor, the East-West Corridor, and the Beach Corridor are all elements directly from the SMART plan, as well as some BERT network routes such as the Flagler Corridor. You can also see here the underlined phase 2, which has some funding, and that is continuing to evolve as well. Next slide, please. Now, unfunded capital projects include later phases of the underline. I'm sorry, I misspoke there. That's in the next slide. But major projects here include extensions to the Metro Mover, both loops. So we've got the Brickell Loop in the south and the Omni Loop in the north. But as I said, a lot of these projects are currently unfunded. Next slide, please. Beyond the unfunded projects, we have the Beyond 10 Years table. This essentially looks past the threshold that we are required for this document, and this is more of a visioning. So as you can see on the map, there are a lot more projects here, which makes sense for visioning, but some of the more grounded ones include direct ramps to the Palmetto Intermodal Terminal from Palmetto Express lanes. Projects like this help bring more speed to the BERT network and make sure that those types of projects can function more efficiently and effectively. Next slide, please. Now this moves into the financial plan, and I will pass this along to my colleague, Thomas Rodriguez.
Hey, good evening again. Nice to speak with you all on this presentation. So just very much high level overview of the finances for, this is in particular operating revenues and expenses. As you can see here, proprietary revenues, this is pretty much fare box recovery, is about $83 million. There's a lot of funding from the local revenue support, that's general fund, as well as the PTP surtax, which is just over $290 million. On the operating side of expenses, we have, again, just broadly speaking, operating expenses are around $390 million, a little underneath that. There's also payments to SFRTA of about $4.2 million. And then there's also some debt service expenses and some transfers to the SMART plan as well. If we could go on to the next slide, please. Okay, so this looks at capital revenues. I know there's a lot going on this slide. Basically, what I'd want to direct your attention to is basically a lot of the funding for the capital projects comes from the PTP. You can see prior fiscal year funding, and then the second column is fiscal year 2021. That's our current fiscal year, of course. So, and then this just includes a roll-up of all of those funds and funding that's forecasted for the future years. There's also contributions from local municipalities for the operation of different trolley circulator systems and specialized routes within those municipalities that are captured on here. Just really briefly, these numbers are pulled from the transit capital book that was prepared in September of last year and approved by the BCC. The next slide, please. So this provides a high-level summary of the capital expenses. It's laid out very much in the similar format to the revenues. As you can see here, again, this splits out funding from both the PTP and then other, which is pretty much all other sources that are not PTP. And so again, for fiscal year 2021, there's a Dadeland South intermodal station improvements that Zach touched upon previously, some track replacement projects on here, as well as Metro Mover improvement projects, as well as a South Miami-Dade Transitway corridor, all on here. So again, this provides an overview of where the expenses are for capital projects for the current fiscal year, as well as the next 5 years, and then funding off into the future as well. And next slide. So that concludes the presentation. I'm going to pass it back to Zach here for some concluding remarks, and Francesca.
Yep, thanks everybody. I welcome any questions that you guys have about the document, about the implementation plan, about the progress assessment, anything like that. If anyone has questions, we'd like to open the floor for feedback.
All right. Thank you for your great presentation. I'm scanning the roster here to see if there are any show of hands. I just saw one pop up. Naomi, you recognize? Naomi, please unmute.
Oh, I had unmuted. Thank you again for a very good presentation. You alluded to the fact that you had a plan for people that were not social media or technologically savvy. I'd like to hear more about that, because I'm thinking about the senior community, the elderly community. I'm curious as to how you are really reaching them.
So we placed newspaper ads in the Miami New Times. We explored also placing ads in the Herald and in community papers.
I don't think the seniors read the New Times.
Right, so we also explored the community papers and the Miami Herald as options for advertising, but we wound up going with the Google display banner ads because those will be targeting all sorts of different communities, and we're really hoping on some level that will have more penetration than just the individuals who use it, because a lot of seniors, even if they have very limited digital footprints, the number of people who have smartphones and use it to access websites and things like that where the Google ads are served. We looked at some of the demographics for the age groups that are exposed to these ads. And we can't ensure that we're going to reach everyone, but we are reaching a very large number of senior citizens in it with the ads that were placed.
May I suggest, because I'm not sure that that's going to be as effective as it should be, may I suggest that you target residences or group, what do I want to say, like condos and apartments and things like that where seniors reside, because seniors, they use public transportation quite a bit.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking you need to have a maybe more personalized approach to it in terms of maybe going to these various locations and having postings, or I don't know exactly what, but I don't think this approach is going to reach the seniors that utilize public transportation.
I can add, I understand that it's, not the most ideal outreach for this year. Circumstances being what they are, we don't want to put anyone in harm's way, especially, you know, us potentially going to seniors to distribute surveys. So one method that we have investigated, as Zach mentioned, was the posting in the newspapers, so that anyone who is interested can receive a survey mailed to them. And that, you know, can be requested via phone call, via email, multiple ways. I definitely understand your suggestion and definitely hear you out on the reaching out to various condos. I think that is a good idea. But as far as kind of physical contact, we may need to be, we may need to limit that type of outreach and replace it with some other means that allows us to either provide physical surveys to someone.
Well, you know, you really don't even have to be physically present. If you contact the various condos or associations and just ask them to place an ad in their bulletin.
Okay.
You don't even have to go out there to do that.
Yeah, that's definitely something that while you were saying that, that's exactly what I took a note of, that I think that that's something that we effectively could do, because when you were speaking about going to them, you know, I immediately sort of recoiled at that, but then I thought,
I wasn't
we
thinking
can
about
post
personally going to
Yeah,
them.
yeah.
Yeah, got you.
But we can absolutely like post a flyer or
Right.
have something placed in their bulletin. So we'll explore that, but then that also opens up a little bit of a question of, if you're going to do that at one location, what about all of the others? And then if you miss some, so we need to explore that, but that's definitely some input that could be very helpful.
Okay, thank you.
Just
All right,
last thing, I'm sorry, to briefly add, the survey, the paper survey itself is postage paid already. So, you know, once it is completed, if a physical survey is needed, all it has to be done is.
Okay, thank you all for your input and the Q&A. I have a couple of questions. Number one, you mentioned equity in transit. What does that mean? Well, what's the equity and who's the target?
So there are a number of different ways that we're exploring providing equity in transit. So this crosses a lot of different intersectional categories. So some of the goals that we have target things like the differently abled. So we're aiming for 100% ADA accessibility at all transit stations. There's also, when we look at the route distribution, we're ensuring that we're not underserving any community that needs to be sufficiently served. So
Hello, you still there?
address this. Yes, did I cut out?
Yes, you did for a moment, but we can hear you now.
Okay. Yeah, so we've got a number of different specific things that address equity across a lot of these different intersectional categories, including route analysis, including route consistency analysis, and let me check here on some more of the details for you. And I can get back to you, Dr. Carnegie, with a lot more specifics about this.
Well, you can send that through to our coordinator, Mr. Chance, and he'll circulate it.
Absolutely.
I appreciate that. And my second question is, you had an item there for extension of the Brickell Loop, the mover Brickell Loop. Where's that extension going from and to?
I do not have that map memorized, but I can find that out and forward it to you. But keep in mind that that was an unfunded project, so it's not something that has gone very far.
There's some dollars. I saw some dollars there, so you must be doing something.
Well, I can answer that briefly, Zach, if I may, for a second.
Absolutely.
That that's just because there's dollars that's the assumed capital cost. That doesn't mean that there's actually funding allocated to that project, just to be perfectly clear. If the project is in the future list, it means that there is no money allocated to it. That's just assumed cost of the project.
Could you go back to that?
As far as the alignment, there was a study done by the TPO.
Could you go back to that budget line
that's the
item?
current slide there, right?
See. Did you hear me?
I think it's
I think it's on the screen right
Okay,
now.
that's it right there. Okay. So it's capital costs.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Got
Yeah.
it.
So yeah, that's the assumed capital cost. And if I'm not mistaken, the alignment was bringing the loop around on Brickell Bay Drive. And then, so it basically from its current termini over by the financial station, I think it would cut east over to Brickell Bay Drive and then complete a loop. The specifics escape me right now, but either back on the south side of the river or connecting north of the river onto the main loop in the downtown area. That was a study, again, that the TPO completed about 5 or 6 years ago at this point. To my recollection, that's probably the most recent effort that was conducted on that alignment.
So that alignment would not be serving the Brickell Key area then, just looping around Brickell Bay Drive. Is that it?
To the best of my recollection, I don't think it would go into Brickell Key. I think it would stay on the mainland.
All right, thank you for that. Let me scan the roster here to see if there are any other hands.
I think my child had a hand raised. I don't think she knows how to work the.
Okay.
And Marlon Kelly has his hands raised too.
All right, let's go with Mary Child, and then we'll go with Marlon. And please make your questions as efficient as possible. Thank you, Mary Child.
Our office manager, I asked her because she lives down south by Homestead, and she commutes to South Miami to work. And I said, well, why don't you ever consider taking the busway? And she basically says that it is so scary because there's so little maintenance. It feels dark, it feels dangerous, it feels abandoned. And I saw that that the South State Busway is going to be accelerated, and that's good. But you know, I just wanted to, for the record, say that you know it's great to construct these facilities, but you also need to maintain them such that people like her could feel safe riding transit. And then the other thing I'd like to add is that I'm not that wild about grade separated intersections with the buses. I think that might add more blight to the busway when we need to make it more beautiful and amenable. So that's, you know, just something that I'd like to just throw out there. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mary Child. Mr. Kelly.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in on funding that you kind of brought up. And it just crossed my mind that with the governor of Florida cutting back on some of the budget regarding transportation, will that impact any of the projects that was presented tonight?
I'll take a stab at that. It may be hard to say at this point how funding will be affected by state level decisions. What DTPW does is every year we have our capital budget, which goes through its vetting process so that we can assure what projects will be able to be funded and implemented. And with that, we also have a larger pro forma, which looks out several years in advance to see how we're able to balance our expenses and revenues. So it's hard to say at this point how those projects will be affected. And you kind of bring up a good point that the TDP reflects the state of all of our projects as of December 31st, 2019. So we're showing you all of what we have planned as of the end of 2019. So if there are changes that will come down the pipeline, those will be reflected in subsequent TDPs.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
Sure.
Through the chair, through the chair, just want to recognize that Alexander Adams is present.
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, the governor is using his veto pen, and I kind of flagged that several meetings ago that we should all anticipate cuts in our transit coming. And we're hearing from the governor of Florida. We haven't heard from the feds yet, but I think we all need to be very mindful of that, especially on the operation side, that there may be some cuts in services because of what's going on. So Very good point, Mr. Kelly. Let me see here. I don't see any other hands, either digitally or physically. So let me thank everyone for their presentation. Thank everyone who asked questions and participated in this debate. And I will move on to the next item, which is public comment, the second public comment. Ivan, could you please open the mics for those participants?
We do, Chair, we do have 2 participants on that's attending. I don't know if they have any public comments. One phone number from 407 and then also Ms. Holt.
Okay, well, the mics are open. Let's see if they will participate. Going once, going twice.
If you're on the phone, you have to press *6, I believe, to unmute yourself. Okay.
Ivan, you getting anything from anyone?
I am not getting any public comments at this moment.
All right, well, thank you for that. So we'll move on to the chair's report. And I do have a brief report here. First item, on June 5th, we had a sunshine ethics training, and a couple of us attended that. I did for sure. And I would like to recommend to all of our members that we, based on the changes that are coming and that are evolving, both from a legal perspective as well as from an ethical perspective, that we consider taking a refresher every 3 years. That was my takeaway from that training. I had not been there in about 8 years, so it was a lot of different information, current information for me, so it was quite a learning experience. So my takeaway would be to recommend to you all that you consider doing a refresher every 3 years. This was a virtual event, so it was very convenient for me as well. I don't know how much longer they're going to be offering this training virtually, but bear that in mind. The next CTAC meeting will be in September 2nd, to be exact. And finally, Mr. Swerdlin had raised a question in one of our previous meetings about the Ludlam Trail project. And the feedback that I want to share is that upon acquisition of the trail corridor by the county in December 2019, FDOT required a PD&E study in fulfillment of NEPA requirements. And then Parks and Open Space is currently working through this NEPA process for the Ludlam Trail and hopes to have materials to share with the public and stakeholder committees toward the end of this year. So basically, Mr. Swerdlin, don't expect to hear too much about Ludlam Trail project until the end of this year, assuming that the pandemic doesn't create some other hurdles. So that's the chair's report for this meeting. Any questions or comments? Okay. I see a show of hand. Daniel.
Yes, hi. Just a question on the ethics training. Do you know, are we going to get certificates for that, or because it was virtual, it's not the same, or how's that going to play out?
Mr. Chance?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. They're no longer giving out certificates. What they're doing right now is as long as you're in attendance, and what we did is we sent the attendance sheet to the ethics committee, so they have it documented now that you have attended it.
Thank you.
All right. I'm going to lower your hand, Mr. Iglesias. Okay, I don't see any other show of hand, no other questions. All right, so we're going to move on to new transportation business. Are there any new transportation business that anyone would like to bring forward? You can digitally show your hand or raise your hand physically. I'm looking at you. Seeing none, hearing none. Then that brings us to the final item, adjournment, and I'd like to entertain.
Well, right before you do an adjournment, Mr. Chair, and I almost forgot again. But I do want to take this time out on the behalf of TPO to thank you again for managing our first Zoom meeting back in April, our very, very first Zoom meeting. So Dr. Carnegie, we want to give you some accolades and some kudos, and I want to thank you for running the whole meeting from A to Z. I don't know if everybody knew that or not, but Dr. Carnegie ran the whole meeting from A to Z with the presentations and everything. So we do have a consultant on that's helping out with us right now, that's making everything a little bit more smoother for us. And we want to thank Ivy for being on here as well. But once again, we want to give Dr. Carnegie, our chairman, his due kudos for running our first and also providing Zoom for us the very first time around. So thank you, Dr. Carnegie, for that on behalf of TPO and also on behalf of CTAC committee members.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that we use the FIU platform and they agreed to that. So I won't take all of the credit. I'll pass some on to FIU for facilitating that. Just like they facilitated the use of their Brickell campus many years ago, if you all remember that. So they're very much involved with community activities like this. So thank you for the accolades, and I much appreciate that. And I was on item 12, so I'd like to entertain a motion for adjournment.
Move.
Is that Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
All right, and I'll second. So officially, we got this meeting ended at 6:42.
Awesome.
All right, so thank you all for being here, and we really appreciate your active participation, your inputs, your excellent debates, all of the positive action, and the mutual respect and cooperation. That's very much appreciated. So please have a good night. Stay safe, stay healthy. Be blessed, be productive until we meet in September. Have a good night.
Have a good summer, everybody.
Stay safe, everyone.